He bought a bride to cover up his massive financial fraud. Marcus Holloway wanted a strategic acquisition to use her family's company as collateral for his massive debts. When Victoria discovered her groom was running a criminal house of cards, she fled in her wedding dress. Armed with stolen financial records and a loaded gun on the table, the ultimate hunt began.
Let us step inside this grand cathedral together, you and I. Listen to the suffocating silence hanging beneath the vaulted ceiling. This is no wedding. We are witnessing a beautiful execution. Victoria Ashford stands frozen, a fragile bird trapped in spun silk. It is not cold feet anchoring her. Her body refuses to march toward Marcus Holloway, surrendering to the agonizing fire of a fractured rib, his brutal wedding gift. The sanctuary reeks of sweet orchids and decaying morals. From the altar, Marcus watches her with the terrifying patience of a wolf whose prey is cornered. The lesson here is absolute. When your own bones shatter just to stop you from walking into someone's arms, you must listen. You do not take another step forward. You turn around and you run. Marcus designed this spectacular ruin, weaving a tight web of debt around the Ashford name. Beside the trembling bride, Robert plays the warden. Notice how he refuses to look into his daughter's tear-filled eyes. His soul was auctioned off the day their empire fell, bought by the massive check. Marcus slid across a polished mahogany desk. "Just smile," Robert hisses through clenched teeth, a coward crumbling under his own profound failure. The heavy, booming chords of the organ do not sing of romance. They thump like a relentless drumbeat leading up to a guillotine. Beneath her stiff corset, the bruised rib burns like hot iron. Here is a vital truth we must never forget. You must never let anyone auction off your bodily safety just to refill their hollow bank accounts. We are watching a dark tragedy unfold in real time. Marcus never sees his violence as a loss of temper. In his twisted mind, it is merely a necessary correction. Just 2 nights ago, his heavy hands twisted violently into her hair in the dark, demanding total submission. She foolishly prayed that a wedding ring might soften his rage. Suddenly, her heel catches on the thick lace of her gown. She sways. Instead of catching her with a father's warmth, Robert digs his sharp nails right into her bare arm, demanding she keep up the lie. Victoria forces her trembling spine perfectly straight, but the fractured bone screams in protest. A sickening wave of gray washes over her fading vision. Listen closely to this lesson. A dangerous predator does not suddenly become a gentle protector just because you sign a piece of paper. Her exhausted nervous system finally surrenders to the dark. The glowing stained glass spins into a blur, and just before the cold marble floor strikes her face, a comforting thought sparks. At least she avoids the altar today. When her heavy eyelids flutter open, the rich scent of aged leather fills her lungs. She rests on a deep velvet sofa in a shadowed study. Cool air hits her ribs because someone has mercifully cut open the brutal laces of her corset. "Don't move," a low, gravelly voice commands from the corner. This is not Marcus. A tall stranger steps from the shadows, his sharp, analytical eyes completely shifting the gravity of the room. Keep this solid truth close to your heart. Sometimes, an absolute collapse is the only way the universe can drag you away from your own destruction and force an entirely new path. Look at the man sitting across from her. He clearly does not belong with the polished elite outside. With his dark sleeves rolled up, he radiates the quiet, dangerous energy of a man who memorizes the exits of every room he enters. Victoria weakly gasps, demanding to know where she is. "The church office," he replies, offering absolutely zero hollow pity. He mentions that Marcus wanted an ambulance, but he suggested handling it quietly. Just hearing the groom's name makes her wounded stomach twist in fear. She whispers, asking who he is. Nathaniel Carver, he murmurs. He claims to be a friend of Marcus, but the icy, mocking amusement dancing in his dark eyes screams of a bitter rivalry. The lesson here is incredibly simple. Always pay attention to the silent observers in the shadows, because they usually hold all the true power. You and I both know the dread of a secret being dragged into the blinding light. Victoria forces her trembling body upright, gritting her teeth against the violent stabbing in her ribs. Hearing muffled music from the chapel, she panics, stammering that she has to go back, even though it means marching into a cage. Nathaniel remains perfectly still and softly shatters her world. He mentions that her makeup has smeared, pure terror floods her veins. Her shaking fingers fly to her cheekbone, coming away with thick foundation. The bridal mask is completely destroyed, exposing the sickening purple bruise Marcus left on her skin. Nathaniel, Lucian watches her, his unblinking eyes proving he knew the ugly truth from the start. Take this lesson to heart. You can paint over your trauma all you want, but the brutal truth always washes the disguise away. Trembling in satin heels designed for a porcelain doll, she limps toward the heavy, gold-rimmed mirror. The reflection shatters her completely. The flawless bridal illusion has melted, leaving the dark, violent reality blooming across her delicate face. She spent endless months mastering the quiet art of suffering, yet her own flesh betrayed the secret. Sit down. Nathaniel commands softly, his deep voice unnervingly calm. She stubbornly refuses, her heavy silk skirts rustling like the iron bars of a beautiful prison. She desperately asks if the bruise is obvious, and his nod is brutally honest. Panicking, she stammers out her rehearsed lie about a clumsy fall. Nathaniel just sighs her name, sounding like an ancient ghost, mourning a tragedy. Here is a deep lesson. Defending the monster who breaks you will only shatter what is left of your own soul. The dim study grows heavy with unspoken accusations. Victoria glares at this shadow of a man, feeling the walls of her false reality crumbling. She snaps, her voice shaking, telling him he knows absolutely nothing about her life. Nathaniel does not back down. He slowly leans into the light, his voice a dark rumble, admitting he knows exactly what kind of monster Marcus becomes when the doors lock. She physically recoils, whispering a frantic plea for him to stay quiet. Nathaniel scoffs at her fear. Why whisper while she is led straight to the slaughterhouse? He coldly lists the bitter facts, her constant flinching, the way she guards her broken ribs, the thick paint. Her body is screaming a truth her mind tries to deny. The core lesson here is vital. Your body will always reveal the brutal truth, no matter how hard your mind tries to bury the pain. Stick with me here, because we can almost feel the oak walls closing in around her throat. Victoria grips the thick lace of her gown, desperately trying to anchor herself. When Nathaniel stands, his massive silhouette blocks the light, yet he stays near the desk to give her room to breathe. With cold, surgical precision, he describes the pathetic play happening outside. Her father is inventing excuses. Her mother is swallowing pills. Marcus is performing the heartbroken groom flawlessly. Nathaniel warns that any second they will tear the door open to drag her back to the cross. The darkest tragedy, she knows he is absolutely right. Her own family is throwing her to a wolf to save their mansion. Listen to this harsh truth. Sometimes, the very people meant to keep you safe are the ones happily locking the heavy steel chains around your wrists. Victoria furiously clings to a shattered illusion, arguing this wedding is just a business merger. When Nathaniel asks if a golden cage is what she desires, the defense chokes in her throat. She confesses her family is entirely bankrupt, painting herself as the noble sacrifice. Nathaniel rips that martyr complex to shreds. He states the freezing reality. She isn't acting out of brave devotion. She is paralyzed by the terrifying thought of what Marcus will do if she tries to run. The psychological mirror he forces her to look into is devastating. She begs him to walk away. Instead, Nathaniel takes a slow step forward. He reveals he has studied Marcus for 15 years, watching him destroy businesses and bury the women who came before her. The lesson is undeniable. Dressing a hungry monster up as your hero will never guarantee you make it out alive. With terrifying calmness, Nathaniel breaks down the twisted mind of an abuser. He explains how Marcus hunts for isolated prey with no money to fight back, slowly breaking their spirit. Victoria begs him to stop as the brutal accuracy suffocates her. He offers a grim warning. The second that ring slides onto her finger, the real beatings will begin. Once she is legally his property, Marcus will never hold back again. Before the horror of his words can settle, the brass door handle rattles violently. Her father shoves into the room, but the true nightmare stands right behind him. Marcus wears a mask of loving concern, so perfect it turns the blood to ice. He rushes over, swallowing her shaking hands inside his. The warmth of his skin feels exactly like the jaws of a steel trap snapping shut. Here is your lesson. A cage made of pure, glittering gold is still a prison. You and I are going to unpack this together because it is a masterclass in psychological warfare. Victoria chokes on the air, lying that her corset caused the fainting. Marcus gently strokes her knuckles, acting like a devoted lover. Beneath the facade, he is mercilessly crushing her delicate bones, sending a silent, agonizing threat through her hand. Robert stands by like a blind fool, ready to march his daughter to the slaughter. Then, Nathaniel completely shatters the power dynamic. With heavy authority, he announces she needs more rest. Marcus drops the loving act. His eyes turn into dead black ice. Standing tall like a stone fortress, Nathaniel casually drops the name of a highly classified, illegal meeting from 5 years ago. Let this hard truth sink in. Your darkest sins will always hunt you down the exact moment you believe you are untouchable. Let us step into this frame together, you and I. The chandelier casts heavy shadows across Marcus's face, where a brief flicker of panic is instantly buried by the cold mask of a predator. He reaches for Victoria, trying to pull her into his stage performance, like a lifeless doll. But she simply turns to stone, ignoring the monster gripping her bruised flesh. She anchors her desperate eyes on Nathaniel, who stands half swallowed by the gloom as an immovable statue of defiance. Drawing on that silent strength, she violently wrenches her arm free. Her father stammers about the elites waiting outside, but she cuts him down with a frozen glare. We learn a hard truth here. True freedom only begins the exact second you plant your feet and refuse to be moved. The obedient daughter fractures her tragic mold, demanding 5 minutes alone. The air grows suffocating. Marcus vibrates with a dark, contained rage, yet paints a flawless smile across his face. He presses a gentle kiss to her trembling forehead, but his breath carries pure poison. Against her skin, he whispers a promise to destroy her if she dares humiliate him. It is a sickening portrait of control. He drags her hollowed-out father into the corridor, and the heavy oak door clicks shut. But Nathaniel does not move. He sinks into a velvet chair, ignoring her desperate pleas for him to leave. He knows if he steps away, she will march straight to her own slaughter. Sometimes, the most profound grace in this dark world is a steadfast ally who refuses to let you destroy yourself. The soft light catches Nathaniel as he stares her down, refusing to watch her hurl her future into the abyss. Victoria shatters, screaming that he could never understand the sheer terror of a cornered animal. But the camera catches a profound darkness washing over his features. The ghosts of his own buried tragedies bleed through his posture. In a quiet, gravelly voice, he confesses that he intimately knows the crushing gravity of rock bottom. Closing the distance, he shatters the last of her illusions. The clock is bleeding out. They have 2 short minutes before Pono Vanok. 2 minutes to marry a demon or step off the edge of the world. True freedom is never a peaceful gift. It is something we must violently carve out of our deeply agonizing choices. Victoria collapses, her heavy silk gown pooling on the floor. She sketches out the catastrophic ruin. If she runs, her father's legacy burns to the ground. But watch as Nathaniel coldly dismantles that devotion. He forces her to look at the blood on her family's hands, showing how they strapped her to the altar as a human shield. Anyone can see that's not love. It is a parasitic exchange. Through bitter sobs, she claims her family needs her. Nathaniel's voice cuts like shattered glass. They do not need her. They only need the syndicate's dirty money, and they are auctioning her soul to get it. Marcus will eventually drain the very life from her eyes. We all must learn this brutal lesson. Never set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Victoria tries to defend her father, but the words turn to ash. The harsh lines of Nathaniel's face soften into tragic pity. He paints the bleak canvas of her future. Her husband might not plan her murder today, but a monster only needs one blind rage, one misplaced strike against a marble floor. The heavy fabric of her gown vibrates from the terror shaking her bones. She begs to know why a stranger cares. His answer is haunting. He knows the precise sound of a soul lying to itself before the dark swallows it. He is no savior. He is merely the harsh mirror forcing her to wake up. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door fractures the air like a gunshot. The hardest choices in life always distill down to one final heartbeat where we must either surrender or fiercely fight. The thickest prisons are the ones we forge in our own minds. Victoria stands frozen, whispering about the apocalypse a refusal will trigger. Nathaniel cuts through the noise. Yes, the syndicate boss will become a joke. Yes, her father will fall to pieces. But he grounds her with one piercing truth. She will actually be alive to see it. Let's look at this moment together. Another heavy knock strikes the oak. She lays her trembling hand on the icy brass doorknob. The easy path is right there. Just smile, walk out, and embrace the tragedy. But Marcus's venomous breath suddenly ghosts across her memory. She pictures the private island honeymoon, 2 endless weeks. No escape, just the vast empty ocean, and a bloodthirsty predator waiting alone with her in the dark. A wave of devastating clarity crashes over her. Marcus has not just controlled her, he has erased her into a hollow ornament. She thinks of her photography gear gathering dust, the friends she ghosted to avoid the pity in their eyes. She has been feeding her spirit to a parasite. Slowly, she cracks the heavy door open. The sweating wedding planner stands in the hall, bathed in harsh light, framing a tunnel straight into hell. Victoria's voice splinters as she demands 60 more seconds. The planner attempts to argue, but Victoria violently slams the door shut. She turns back to Nathaniel. He watches her from the shadows, recognizing a fire that refuses to be extinguished. The ultimate rebellion is simply remembering who you were before the dark world tried to break you. Victoria shatters, her voice splintering as she confesses she cannot survive this nightmare. She buries her face, makeup running in dark rivers of tears. It is the universal feeling of a crushing, airless weight pressing down. She chokes on a sob, declaring she cannot marry this tyrant. Nathaniel offers no empty platitudes. He just gives a calm nod and says, "Okay." She looks up, stunned. He speaks her name, not as a bargaining chip, but as a living woman's it. The choice is made, he says. She only needs the grit to walk it out. When she spirals about where to hide, Nathaniel pulls a crisp white card from his coat. One name, one number. Remember, when you finally find the terrifying courage to leap off the edge, you will always discover a place to land. Watch closely how the power shifts in this room. Nathaniel slides the card into her trembling hand. "Call it the second you vanish," he commands. When she searches his face for a motive, his mask slips, revealing a jagged scar of grief. "Someone should have been there," he murmurs, "to save the last woman Marcus broke." A violent knock shatters the quiet. Victoria's pulse pounds in her throat, yet she asks Nathaniel to walk her out. She is about to detonate her entire world. Bravery is simply walking forward while your knees shake. She hauls the door open, facing her corrupt father and her smiling captor. Before her father can bark an order, she cuts him off cold, announcing she has something to say. Marcus's dark eyes narrow into slits. The predator instantly knows his prey has slipped the snare. Marcus tries to leash her again, hiding his dominance behind fake gentleness by suggesting she fix her ruined makeup. Victoria swats his hand away with an icy refusal that rings out like a gunshot. She steps forward, Nathaniel shadowing her like a towering shield. Stripped of control, Marcus's handsome mask melts away. The vicious mob boss finally emerges. His voice drops to a lethal hiss, promising violence if she dares humiliate his empire. But she does not blink. Holding his dark gaze, she drives the final dagger in. The wedding is cancelled. The silence that follows is heavy enough to crush bone. Escaping a monster always requires bringing the roof down. Her father starts frantic bargaining, but she is totally numb to him, simply watching Marcus map out his cold retaliation. Victoria tells Marcus her role in his twisted theater is finished. He warns she is making a fatal error, his knuckles turning white. But Victoria claims her life with breathtaking defiance. "It is her mistake to make," she whispers, turning her back on the most lethal predator in the city. It takes immense courage to execute that fateful pivot. She shoves open the massive doors, stepping into a cathedral packed with elite spectators. Ignoring the artificial dynasty built to trap her, she marches straight to the altar and grips the microphone. Her voice booms through the vaulted ceiling, steady as stone, officially cancelling the union. A ghostly silence hangs heavy in the air before the room shatters into absolute, screaming chaos, punctuated by her mother's weeping. Victoria chooses the terrifying unknown over a golden cage. Stick with me, because this final image is striking. Nathaniel stands by the side exit, a guardian executing the extraction. He throws the heavy door open, guiding her into the blinding sunlight. Victoria takes her first genuine breath of air. Inside, her father is screaming, and Marcus roars with primal fury. The corrupt empire they built on her shoulders has burned to ash. The lesson here is absolute. Never let another human cannibalize your future to fund their dark ambitions. Still trembling, she asks Nathaniel what happens now. He flashes a calm smile, promising to make her completely untouchable. A sleek black sedan glides to the curb. She climbs inside, leaving the wreckage of her old life behind forever. The getaway car smells of leather and blind panic. Victoria's wedding dress, a mountain of bone-white lace, swallows the back seat. The stiff corset digs into her ribs, a physical echo of the Mafia cage she is fleeing. Beside her, Nathaniel remains entirely draped in shadow. His voice is a detached hum as he orders the driver to vanish. Through the tinted glass, Victoria watches her father burst from the church doors. His face is a mask of violent rage, screaming at his enforcers as the tires shriek. The sight shatters her. Her bitter laughter melts into raw, gasping sobs. Nathaniel watches her, quietly telling her to breathe. The tragic truth of survival is simple. Tearing yourself away from a cycle of abuse often feels exactly like drowning, long before you ever learn how to swim. Today, you and I will witness the quiet devastation of a shattered empire. The engine idles as Victoria stumbles out, her trembling legs giving way. She collapses onto the concrete, her gown pooling in the dim streetlight like a ghost of the life she just killed. Nathaniel crouches nearby, the space between them, heavy with unspoken grief. She whispers to the dark asphalt that she has destroyed her family name. But Nathaniel's eyes catch the pale light. He tells her the absolute truth. She did not destroy them. She simply refused to let them destroy her. It is an agonizing lesson we must carry. You cannot set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Still shivering, she begs him to understand her father's cruelty, terrified of the sheer isolation coming for her. Panic hits her in brutal waves. Her chest heaves beneath the tight silk. She is certain her father's syndicate will burn, and every drop of spilled blood will be on her hands. Nathaniel's voice cuts through the freezing air. It is steady, commanding her to stop. By some miracle, the violent static in her mind obeys. He offers no hollow comforts. Admitting the Mafia fallout will be ruthless, but he swears she will survive. He reminds her of the undeniable reality. She just walked away from a monster in front of 200 armed men. The sheer courage that takes is immeasurable. He steps closer, holding out a scarred hand. It feels like falling blindly into the dark right now. But the beauty of the human spirit is clear. You survive the brutal impact, and then you teach yourself how to stand back up. A heavy stillness settles over them. Nathaniel's voice is low and grounding. Standing on a public sidewalk in a bridal gown is a dangerous gamble. Victoria blinks, spotting the glowing screens of cell phones in the shadows. Strangers are recording her most agonizing moment, eager to feast on the Mafia runaway bride. Swallowing the bitter ash of her shattered pride, she takes his hand. The heavy silk fights every step, a clinging ghost of her gilded cage. They vanish into a maze of nameless backstreets, finally stopping at a secluded brownstone hidden beneath ancient trees. He unlocks the heavy deadbolts with practiced, silent grace. This quiet sanctuary serves as a poignant reminder. Sometimes, the only way to find true safety is to step entirely off the map, leaving the wreckage of your old life completely behind you. The heavy door clicks shut. Nathaniel's voice is a low rumble, offering her this sanctuary until the Mafia firestorm burns to ash. Inside, dim golden light reveals worn brick and lived-in furniture, the absolute opposite of Marcus's sterile, blood-bought penthouse. Nathaniel keeps a careful distance, pointing her toward the stairs. Victoria stands frozen in the hall, trapped in the ruined silk. The crushing weight of her reality finally drops. Her father owns her bank accounts. Marcus owns the violent streets. She has nothing but this quiet stranger. She whispers into the dark that she is entirely empty-handed, but you and I must look closely at this exact moment. True freedom almost always begins in the terrifying, heavy silence of losing absolutely everything you once knew. A bitter laugh scrapes her throat as she confesses the depth of her ruin. She fled the cathedral with nothing but a theatrical dress and a canvas of dark bruises hidden beneath it. Nathaniel does not flinch. His gaze remains steady, meeting her despair with immovable calm. He vows they will dismantle this nightmare one agonizing piece at a time. He leaves faded clothes outside her door, granting her the sacred dignity of an empty room. Now begins the physical unearthing of her trauma. Victoria goes to war with the stubborn zipper. Her fractured ribs scream with every desperate, shaking twist. Peeling away that tight corset takes 10 agonizing minutes. It highlights a brutal reality of human survival. Tearing yourself free from the toxic structures that define you often hurts exactly as much as wearing them. Stripped bare of the Mafia glamour, she faces the mirror. The physical toll is devastating. A violent constellation of purple shadows wraps across her ribs. Dark fingerprints stain her arms, silent testimonies of Marcus's fury. A faded scar marks the grim timeline of their twisted romance. She is a living canvas of inherited violence, conditioned to swallow the pain. Trembling, she pulls on the baggy clothes, desperate to anchor herself. Downstairs, Nathaniel wrestles with an espresso machine. When she quietly declines, he seamlessly pivots to brewing a soft, warm tea. It is a profoundly gentle accommodation in a world built on ruthless demands. We must never forget this truth. Even in the absolute darkest shadows, a quiet, unexpected kindness still has the power to anchor a shattered soul. Let's pause and examine this surreal frame. Victoria sits at an ordinary kitchen table, disoriented by the safety of a normal life. She finally asks the heavy question: how does this stranger know the monster she almost married? Nathaniel does not flinch. He pours the steaming water, the weight of a shared, bloody history darkening his eyes. Their fathers were architects of the same brutal underworld, orchestrating violence until the end. Marcus inherited the darkest parts of their world. He mastered the predatory art of total control, learning how to pinpoint a cracked soul and shatter it. You and I must recognize this painful truth. Toxic cycles do not simply vanish with time. They are meticulously handed down in the shadows, surviving only until someone is finally brave enough to walk away. Victoria grips the warm mug like a lifeline. Her knuckles turn white as she asks if she was merely a weakness for Marcus to exploit. Nathaniel delivers the cold truth like a gavel. She was never a partner, but a strategic acquisition. Her father's empire was bleeding cash, and Marcus craved the assets. A grand wedding was a cheaper alternative to a hostile buyout. There was no romance, only calculated leverage. When she asks if Nathaniel views himself as a righteous savior, he shatters the illusion. He confesses his own haunting guilt. 5 years ago, another victim named Amanda suffered this exact torture, and he remained entirely silent. The profound lesson of this tragedy is painfully clear. Remaining silent in the face of pure cruelty only makes you a silent architect of the pain. The silence in the kitchen deepens into a suffocating fog. Victoria sits paralyzed as Nathaniel unravels the dark history. Marcus put Amanda in the hospital twice before she fled, erasing her identity with syndicate money to ensure her silence. Nathaniel stares at his hands, admitting the heavy weight of his inaction. He watched the psychological terror escalate, yet did nothing until her skull was fractured. When Victoria whispers an apology for his guilt, he sharply rejects it. He demands only one thing. She must promise not to become another buried tragedy in Marcus's shadow. She agrees, terrified of the blank horizon. Stick with me, because this teaches us a terrifying principle. Taking a massive leap of faith away from your abusers rarely comes with the soft comfort of a safety net. Victoria had not planned a single breath beyond surviving the altar. Now, her future stretches out as a terrifying, empty canvas. Nathaniel leans across the weathered wood, offering an unexpected sanctuary. He tells her to remain hidden while he navigates the violent Mafia fallout, promising to shield her accounts and divert Marcus's dogs. Conditioned by syndicate paranoia, Victoria instinctively searches for the hidden transaction. Nathaniel holds her steady gaze, stating plainly that she simply needed a way out. This is his penance for abandoning Amanda to the wolves. You and I must remember the profound truth captured in this final frame. True strength does not mean dying alone in the dark. It means possessing the courage to swallow your pride and accept a lifeline when you are drowning. Come with me, and let's look closely at Victoria as she searches Nathaniel's shadowed eyes for the hidden trap. She was raised in a cold world where every rescued breath comes with a price. If this stranger is running a con, his performance is terrifyingly flawless. A violent panic grips her ribs, her passport, her entire identity, left behind in the silk of that bridal suite. She begs to call her sister, Claire, the only one who saw the bruises Marcus left. But Nathaniel cuts her off. The family will trace the signal in seconds. It is a bitter pill to swallow. Sometimes, keeping the people we love completely safe means abandoning them in the dark. Survival often demands we sever our most vital connections just to stop the bleeding. Victoria exhales a shattered breath, conceding that one call could be fatal. She agrees to vanish into the shadows for 24 hours. When food arrives, she chews like a broken machine. She just detonated her family's empire and cannot tell if she secured her freedom or dug her own grave. Nathaniel watches her vacant stare, urging her to stop fighting invisible wars in her head. Her fork slips from her trembling fingers. She whispers that she feels absolutely nothing. No victory, no terror, just suffocating ice. He gives a slow nod. The true agony is waiting just offshore. We expect surviving trauma there to feel like walking into the sunlight, but healing never begins with peace. It always starts in the deafening silence before the hurricane makes landfall. Now, you and I need to look closely at how Nathaniel operates in the shadows. He slides a cheap burner phone across the scratch table, warning her that her real number is about to become a toxic wasteland of rage. Victoria says plastic, demanding to know how he moves through this criminal underworld with such ease. The defensive tension leaves his shoulders. He confesses that the father who gently tucked him in at night was the same monster who built a massive syndicate on the broken backs of the innocent. Realizing the rot goes that deep into your own roots is a crushing blow. Discovering that your childhood hero is actually the villain is a profound, irreversible grief. It permanently shatters the lens through which you view every single person you ever meet. The dim light catches the disbelief on Victoria's face as she asks if he walked away clean. Nathaniel offers a sad, hollow smile. When his father died, he inherited an ocean of blood money. For 6 brutal years, he bled his soul dry, trying to balance the scales, paying off the forgotten victims. He admits that carrying a dead man's guilt will break your back. Victoria's voice turns sharp, asking if rescuing her is just a cheap way to launder his conscience. His eyes soften, insisting she simply deserves a life free from terror. But her mind is too bruised to accept the warmth. Deep betrayal permanently warps your vision, making even the purest kindness look like a violent trap. Drained, she drags her aching body upstairs and collapses under the crushing weight of tomorrow. She stares at the ceiling, waiting for tears, but a massive emotional void has swallowed her grief. Around midnight, Nathaniel's voice drifts through the floorboards. He sits in the dark, working the phones, mapping their survival, while she struggles to breathe. When exhaustion finally drags her under, the trauma strikes, the dream drops her back into that suffocating cathedral. Marcus stands at the altar, his perfect smile masking the violent monster underneath. She tries to run, but her wedding gown turns into wet concrete, dragging her down. Escaping a cage physically never instantly sets your mind free. The heaviest chains are the ones we carry in our memories. She jolts awake in the pitch-black room, violently gasping for oxygen in the dead silence. Victoria presses a trembling hand against her ribs, letting the dull ache anchor her panic. As grey morning light bleeds through the glass, she hears Nathaniel downstairs, fighting an invisible war on her behalf. She needs to move, but her limbs are paralyzed. Did her mother shed a single tear? Or did her toxic family simply erase her? Is Marcus destroying her reputation, or quietly waiting in the shadows? Fleeing a burning house sometimes just leaves you standing alone in the freezing cold. We all eventually learn that running away is rarely the final chapter. The absolute hardest part of taking your power back is surviving the terrifying aftermath. A soft knock echoes at the heavy wooden door, forcing her to finally face her broken reality. Pay close attention, because you and I are about to watch a tragic masterclass in betrayal. Nathaniel pushes open the door, holding a warm mug of tea, but his eyes carry the heavy weight of bad news. When Victoria asks for the brutal truth, he does not soften the blow. Her own father is currently staging a massive press conference. The family machine is in full damage control, spinning her desperate escape as a mental breakdown, and the knife twists deeper. Marcus is officially suing her family's empire, squeezing their accounts so violently that they are happily throwing Victoria to the wolves to save their own wealth. It is a sobering life lesson we must all face. Sometimes, the exact people who swore to protect you will gladly auction off your sanity just to protect their bottom line. Nathaniel sits on the mattress, his quiet presence anchoring the room. While she drowned in nightmares, he spent the night tearing into Marcus's bulletproof empire. The revelation is staggering. The entire fortune is built on smoke and cheap mirrors. The massive financial injection he promised her father literally does not exist. Marcus is drowning in bankruptcies, planning to drain her family's assets like a piggy bank. Victoria was just a life raft for a sinking rat. This should bring vindication, but instead, a blinding wave of pure rage washes over her. Every tender kiss was a calculated scam. It proves a dark truth about humanity. A charming smile is often just a polished mask worn by a desperate predator looking to bleed you dry for their own survival. Nathaniel holds enough financial dirt to make a monster sweat pure panic. He has journalism contacts who would absolutely feast on this fraudulent empire. He offers to systematically dismantle Marcus, stripping away his power to ever trap another victim. Victoria sits in the heavy silence. She barely found the strength to escape, and now he is handing her the ultimate weapon. She closes her eyes, and the haunting image of Amanda's bruised face in the hospital flashes in her mind. She pictures her own father bartering her away like a corporate asset. True healing often sparks the exact second we finally refuse to protect the monsters who shattered us. Victoria opens her eyes, locking her gaze onto Nathaniel with a terrifyingly cold calm, and tells him to pull the trigger. Nathaniel's mouth lifts into a dark smile that carries zero warmth. At 3 in the afternoon, the press conference goes live. Victoria sits in the dim room, eyes locked onto the screen. Her father steps up to the podium. The camera flashes, highlighting every bitter line on his face. Her mother hovers in the background with a medicated detachment, leaning into the microphones. Her father drips with rehearsed sympathy. He paints his daughter as a fragile, unstable girl, buckling under the pressure of a wedding. It highlights a tragic truth. Toxic families will eagerly sacrifice their own flesh and blood to protect their shiny public reputation. He demands privacy for her imaginary treatment, then boldly pledges his total loyalty to Marcus. The sheer audacity of his performance is staggering. Stick with me, because we are about to uncover the darkest layers of this performance. The camera pans to Marcus, who wears a flawless mask of wounded pride. With a rehearsed tremor in his voice, he proclaims his undying love for his runaway bride, acting as though his only desire is her safe return. Watching this sickening act, Victoria whispers a single word, liar. Then, the ultimate betrayal strikes. Her mother grabs the microphone, begging the public to report any sightings of her daughter. They are deliberately twisting her brave escape into a psychiatric emergency. Nathaniel quietly snaps the laptop shut. Victoria paces the worn floorboards, burning with agonizing fire. Holding on to the truth is a crushing burden when everyone you love is desperately shoveling dirt to bury it forever. Victoria shakes with pure fury. Her mother played the grieving widow to a living child. Her father branded her unstable, and Marcus soaked up the world's sympathy. But the universe always balances the scales. Nathaniel's phone vibrates, and a dangerous light sparks in his eyes. The financial expose just went live. The truth about Marcus's fake empire is trending everywhere. Nathaniel spins the laptop around, revealing a merciless headline. The journalist brought every receipt, exposing the bank fraud, the embezzlement, and the buried reports of Amanda's physical abuse. It is a flawless masterpiece of total destruction. It proves that, no matter how much wealth and power you use to bury your toxic secrets in the dark, the truth always violently demands to be heard in the end. Today, you and I are going to walk through the architecture of a tragedy. The camera lingers on Victoria, frozen in the dim, heavy light. Paralyzed by the sheer volume of evidence Nathaniel has spread across the mahogany desk, he leans back, the ghosts of his past pulling at the corners of his eyes. He has waited in the dark for years, ever since the brutal night Amanda was attacked. Stripping a tyrant like Marcus of his power reveals the trembling coward underneath. Suddenly, the oppressive silence fractures. A sharp vibration echoes from Victoria's burner phone. It is Claire, her sister, the only soul who holds that number. It is a devastating reminder for all of us. The most righteous battles we wage almost always drag the ones we love most deeply into the bleeding crossfire. The cold glow of the screen cuts through the shadows, illuminating the raw panic etched across Victoria's face. Claire's messages flood in. The family estate has collapsed into screaming chaos. Their father paces the floor in blind fury. Marcus threatens massive lawsuits, and their mother sobs into her hands. Claire demands answers, entirely blinded to the rotten roots choking the air from the tree. Her hands shaking violently, Victoria types back the crushing truth. She had to flee to survive. When Claire begs to see her, Nathaniel steps into the frame, his voice a low, unyielding command. No meetings, the risk is too grave. It is a bitter truth to accept, but desperation twists the human heart. Sometimes, even the purest sibling will trade your safety just to glue the shattered pieces of a broken home back together. Notice the tension in Victoria's shoulders as she stares at the fading screen. She is drowning in a brutal tug-of-war between her own desperate survival and a profound, aching love for her sister. Abandoning Claire in the wreckage is a sin she cannot bear. Nathaniel watches her crumbling posture, exhaling a heavy, defeated sigh. He finally yields, but his terms are carved in stone. If they step out of the dark, it must be on a brightly lit public stage. Victoria envisions the sprawling botanical gardens, where shadows cannot hide a predator. Nathaniel gives a slow nod and immediately contacts his security. They have humiliated a vicious wolf. You cannot pull the fangs from a monster and expect it to sleep. Safety is never a permanent promise, but a fragile breath we must fiercely protect. The camera pushes in as the crushing weight of reality sinks its claws into Victoria's chest. She is caught in a lethal game now. A man like Marcus will never quietly fade away. He will weaponize his strong fortune to drag her kicking and screaming back into his golden cage. Guilt suffocates her as she whispers to the floor that she should have stayed. Nathaniel shatters that tragic illusion without a blink. If she had stayed to protect her father's crumbling empire, he states with chilling certainty she would be buried within 5 years. Her father burned his own legacy. Her mother worshipped high society optics over her daughter's life. Fixing their sins is simply not her cross to bear. We often cast courageous truth-tellers as villains, simply because they are the first to reject the comfortable madness of the crowd. She desperately wants to believe her escape was an act of bravery, yet guilt eats away at her soul. Her phone vibrates again. Claire wants to meet at 2 o'clock. Victoria agrees, though cold dread pools in her stomach. As the heavy night drags on, the camera finds Nathaniel in the shadows, pulling invisible strings over the phone. When dinner arrives, Victoria merely pushes the cold food across her plate. The suffocating silence demands an answer. She softly asks what truly drives his dark crusade. Nathaniel lowers his fork. The ghosts of his past rise violently to the surface of his eyes. He murmurs that his father spent 40 years proving wealth buys absolute immunity from human suffering. To fight the worst monsters in this world, you must entirely reject the poisonous legacy that raised you. Listen closely, because you and I are about to peer into a profoundly wounded soul. Nathaniel stands rigid, his jaw clenched like carved marble in the moonlight. He speaks of his father, a ruthless patriarch who crushed innocent lives and died as the world sang his praises. Nathaniel cannot bleed the poison from his own veins, but he can tear down a man like Marcus. Protecting Victoria is no simple charity. It is a cold, calculated war against every arrogant man who buys his way out of human decency. Sometimes, the most terrifying ghosts we battle share our very own last name. He lets the anger simmer before abruptly asking why she chose the lens of a camera. Victoria grabs the conversational lifeline. Her grandmother gave her a camera at 12. When you only have a few exposures, you quickly learn to make every single frame matter. The psychological framing of this scene is deeply tragic. Victoria's only escape from her suffocating reality was always her camera, yet Marcus forced her to abandon her art, isolating her by snapping the one thread keeping her sane. Never allow a toxic soul to steal your passion, or you will slowly drown in the dark. Watch how the dynamic shifts now. Nathaniel sits across from her, radiating a steady authority, and casually offers to fund a brand new photography setup. He frames the gesture softly, calling it a simple loan. Victoria tries to push the offer away, but the mere memory of holding that heavy glass completely shatters her emotional armor. She turns to the sink, aggressively scrubbing a plate, just to hide her violently shaking hands. A single, desperate spark of her stolen identity is finally breathing again. Nathaniel gently suggests she get some rest, But Victoria is entirely paralyzed by the thought of the dark bedroom upstairs. The absolute silence of isolation only magnifies the screaming ghosts of her past. Bathed in the bright light of the kitchen, she can pretend the walls of her life are not caving in for just one more hour. You and I have both desperately stalled before the hurricane makes landfall, have we not? She leans against the cold marble counter and asks the terrifying question. What exactly happens tomorrow? Nathaniel calmly dries a plate, offering a profoundly beautiful reassurance. The timeline is completely in her hands now. She can hide in this sanctuary as long as she needs. There is no pressure. Sometimes, the most miraculous healing gift you can offer a shattered soul is simply the unburdened freedom to choose. Nathaniel slowly dries his hands, his eyes absorbing the raw panic radiating from her frame. Let us analyze this cinematic moment. He is not playing the role of a selfless savior. Destroying Marcus is a calculated victory for his own dark agenda. Victoria stares directly at this mysterious shield, bluntly admitting that she does not trust him. Nathaniel does not flinch. He replies that trusting absolutely no one is her smartest survival tactic right now. You do not need to inherently trust the stranger throwing you a lifeline when you are drowning in the abyss. He offers her the door if she wishes to run, but Victoria understands the brutal mathematics of power. To walk away is to face the crushing weight of Marcus's wrath alone. She whispers her choice to stay. When you are fighting a monster, a temporary alliance with the shadows becomes your only armor. The camera tracks her hollow gaze. Visualizing a future wiped clean of fear feels like an absolute impossibility right now. But so did leaving a tyrant at the altar. And she survived that leap into blind terror is often the lonely a human to the vault can evolve. Reed Renjun died. After a haunted night, they step into a dusty camera shop that feels like a sacred underground confessional. The weathered owner exchanges a heavy, silent glance with Nathaniel before peering deep into Victoria's exhausted eyes. He softly asks what she intends to capture in this new life. She speaks of her lost street photography, her voice trembling with unshed grief. He gently guides her toward digital equipment, noting its mercifully forgiving nature. We all require a little grace and a fresh lens when rebuilding a shattered life from the ashes. The shopkeeper lines the cameras across the glass. The first two feel alien in Victoria's grip, like viewing the bleeding world through a stranger's eyes. But the third camera slides into her palm with the heavy weight of a loyal soldier returning from war. The owner smiles warmly, watching a layer of trauma visibly lift from her posture. He drops a sharp lens and a bag into the deal. When Victoria hears the staggering total, she physically shrinks back into the shadows. Reclaiming stolen autonomy is always a costly endeavor. Yet Nathaniel covers the expense without a blink. Minutes later, she stands on the pavement, fiercely clutching a bag that holds a literal second chance. Pedestrians have no idea her internal universe is actively rewriting itself. Sometimes discovering a new focal point is exactly the intervention required to save your own life. Peering through the glass viewfinder, the overwhelming chaos of her existence snaps into manageable alignment. She captures the jagged street, the golden light bleeding through the trees. Every precise click of the shutter is a fragmented piece of her soul, locking firmly back into place. You and I must understand that healing is rarely an explosive triumph. It manifests in quiet flashes of reclaiming your power. They walk the city for hours. Nathaniel hangs back like a shadow, providing the exact emotional distance she requires. At the botanical gardens, her spirit feels lighter. Then She spots Claire by the koi pond, looking agonizingly fragile. Nathaniel gestures to a distant bench, silently assuring his absolute protection. True support never smothers. It simply stands ready in the quiet periphery. The weight of a reunion, stained by trauma, hangs heavy in the air. Victoria steps forward, her legs dragging like stone across the gravel. For an agonizing second, the sisters stare across a massive chasm of pain before Claire completely shatters. She sobs, crying she truly believed Victoria was dead. Victoria holds her trembling shoulders, promising she is safe. When Claire asks why she fled the wedding, Victoria refuses to soften the blow. She will never sacrifice her soul to save their father's empire. Her voice drops, reminding Claire of the dark bruises and the terrifying rage Marcus hid behind his charming smile. Claire drops her gaze to the dirt, weeping. She wanted to believe it was an accident. The ugly reality is always the absolute hardest pill for any family to swallow. Two sisters stand trapped in a suffocating web of toxic denial. Claire twists her pale hands, confessing she ignored the abuse because accepting it meant she would actually have to intervene. Victoria feels no anger. She understands, having ignored the nightmares herself until raw survival kicked in. Their parents are spinning a false narrative, telling society Victoria suffered a mental break. And Marcus, the monster, still sits at their table, playing the concerned fiancé. Victoria grips her arm, warning her the man is dangerously unhinged. Claire promises to stay quiet, and Victoria desperately wants to believe her. But we all learned this hard lesson eventually. You cannot expect someone to stand strong in a brutal hurricane when they have spent their entire life bowing to the wind. Stick with me here. Claire's voice trembles over an article exposing Marcus. She asks if Victoria leaked it. Victoria does not hesitate. Yes, she absolutely did. Terror washes over Claire, warning that Marcus is threatening lawsuits. Then comes the heaviest question. Claire whispers, asking if Marcus actually hurt her. Choosing raw honesty, Victoria admits the horrific details. Weeping, Claire asks why she hid the pain. Victoria confesses the crushing shame of the abuse. She thought she could handle it alone until she forgot how to ask for help. Squeezing her sister's hand, she promises she is out for good. The lesson here is vital. A place does not become a safe haven just because you share blood. Sometimes, the home we are taught to love is the exact trap we must escape to survive. Victoria looks into her sister's tear-filled eyes, exposing their wealthy upbringing as a suffocating, gilded cage. She played the perfect daughter for so long it nearly shattered her spirit. Claire's makeup smears as she begs her sister not to leave. Gently, Victoria explains that saving her own life means walking this lonely path. She slips Claire a burner number, strictly forbidding her from sharing it with Marcus. Hiding the paper, Claire asks a heartbreaking question. Is Victoria actually happy? Thinking of the quiet safety she found with Nathaniel, Victoria admits she is not happy yet, but she is finally free. Here is a profound truth. Happiness is never a simple switch you can flip overnight. Sometimes, securing your absolute freedom is the bravest first step you can ever take. The conversation drifts back to the mundane. Claire rambles about garden parties, mere echoes of a life Victoria has entirely abandoned. When they finally embrace, Victoria watches her sister fade into the gardens like a tragic ghost. Stepping from the darkness, Nathaniel asks how it went. Adjusting her camera bag, Victoria hopes Claire finally understands the stakes. But as they walk across the pavement, the burner phone suddenly vibrates in her pocket. An unknown number flashes across the screen. Nathaniel instantly tenses, warning her to drop the device. Yet, A dark psychological pull makes Victoria answer anyway. This exposes a fatal human flaw. When the toxic past comes knocking, our desperate curiosity often overpowers our simple instinct to just walk away and protect our peace. The voice echoing from the speaker belongs to Marcus, smooth and dangerously controlled. He demands an audience, and literal ice floods Victoria's veins. When she asks how he got the number, the monster arrogantly claims he always finds what he wants. He frames her escape as a minor episode. But Victoria holds her ground, firmly stating they are finished. His charming mask instantly shatters, replaced by a vicious promise. He swears to hunt her down and teach her a brutal lesson. The line clicks dead. Trembling, she tells Nathaniel their cover is blown. He immediately grabs her arm, hauling her toward the car. Here is the harsh reality about toxic people. They never view your departure as an act of survival. To them, your hard-won freedom is nothing more than a massive betrayal of their absolute power. We need to look at this moment together. A sick wave of betrayal washes over Victoria. Marcus having that number means Claire folded. Whether she cracked or their parents forced her hand, the reality is the same. Nathaniel guns the engine, tearing away toward a second safe house in the shadows. Crushing despair suffocates Victoria. She asks the point of running if Marcus will hunt her forever. Nathaniel's jaw locks. He explains that running buys time to destroy the man for good. He has the evidence to put Marcus behind bars, but needs time to arrange the pieces. It is devastating when loved ones become the weakest links. But the lesson is clear. Courage is never the absence of fear. Courage is trembling in the dark, yet choosing to take one defiant step forward anyway. Nathaniel merges onto the dark highway, leaving the city behind. Victoria grips her camera bag, haunted by the fear she is only postponing her fate. Soon, they arrive at a cabin swallowed by deep woods. The wind rattles the glass. Nathaniel moves first, clearing the dark rooms with the precision of someone expecting a monster in every shadow. Given the all-clear, Victoria steps inside, clutching her bag like a life preserver. She whispers, asking who owns this place. Nathaniel confesses it is his, hidden beneath a shell company years ago. Life often strips away everything until you are left standing in an empty room. But here is the lesson. Sometimes it is only within that profound, quiet isolation that we find the solid ground needed to finally rebuild ourselves. The adrenaline crashes, leaving Victoria hollowed out as she collapses onto a dusty couch. She buries her face in her hands, blaming herself for trusting Claire. She feels foolish, believing her fragile sister could keep a secret from their toxic family. But Nathaniel offers a stark reality check. She had not been stupid, she had simply been hopeful. We have all made this mistake. Trusting someone too weak to hold our truth, because we desperately wanted to believe in them. Nathaniel reminds her the leak changes nothing. Action is the only cure. He pulls out his phone, deciding to push their timeline up to tonight. He is about to unleash a payload of financial ruin upon Marcus. We must learn to forgive our hopeful hearts. In a dark world, that fragile hope is exactly what keeps our humanity intact. The screen glows as Nathaniel lays out his arsenal. He reveals testimony of harassment, damning security footage, and the knockout punch, sworn statements from 3 other women who survived Marcus and his abuse. Victoria sits stunned. They bravely stepped out of the shadows. Nathaniel's eyes burn with 5 years of meticulous obsession. By tomorrow morning, Marcus and his empire will burn to ash. This evidence will hit the press like a freight train, forcing him to fight for his freedom instead of hunting Victoria. Yet, a chilling emptiness washes over her. Marcus will know who pulled the trigger, and he will hunt Nathaniel down too. Here is the bitter truth about destroying our monsters. Defeating an enemy does not magically heal the deep scars they left behind. Real peace takes time to grow from the bitter ashes. Let's remember this final truth together. Let him try, Nathaniel replies, locking his phone. He states he is not the one needing protection. The words sting. Desperate for space, Victoria wanders to the window, watching the shadows. She whispers how she hates hiding, waiting for someone to fix her life. Nathaniel shoots back he is not here to fix her problems. She fixed the biggest one when she walked away. Did I? She snaps. Because it feels like I ruined everything. For who? He asks. She lists the faults, the company collapsing, her parents hating her, Marcus plotting revenge. How is that better? She glares. You are alive, Nathaniel says simply. You are free. You are no longer doomed to manage the moods of a toxic man. The lesson here is unavoidable. Walking directly through hell is often the exact price we pay for true freedom. The air in the room turns to ice the moment Victoria levels her agonizing accusation. Nathaniel does not flinch. Shadows carve exhausted lines into his face as his voice drops to a dangerous rumble. For 40 years, he stood paralyzed, watching his father annihilate lives. Her father chose comfort when he traded her to the syndicate boss, just as her mother did by ignoring her bruised skin. Nathaniel steps closer, demanding she never apologized for finally choosing herself. She weeps, confessing she feels nothing but blind terror. He offers a solemn nod. Fear is a cruel but necessary teacher. The simple truth is that embracing our raw terror is often the exact force that keeps us breathing when the world demands our quiet surrender. Nathaniel steps into the pale light, demanding she take that crippling terror of Marcus and forge it into a blade. Pick up the camera, he urges. Start over. You and I both know how brutal it is to rebuild when your own blood has destroyed your name. Victoria slumps in defeat. Who would hire her now? Use a fake name, he suggests, pulling up a gallery website 20 miles away. She looks up, eyes shining with tears, asking why he is helping her. His answer cuts through the suffocating air. She needs a future severed from her family and their poison. Real talent must never drown in fear. We all eventually learn that sometimes the only way out of a dark room is to build your own door with your bare hands. Victoria stares at the glowing screen, trembling under the weight of an impossible hope. Fair enough, Nathaniel murmurs, dissolving into the deep shadows of his office. Left alone, Victoria is burdened by the crushing weight of choices she can never unmake. Desperate for a clean breath, she steps out onto the old porch. The afternoon bleeds into magic hour, washing the tall pines in a fading, tragic gold. Her trembling hands lift the camera. Twisted shadows. A lone bird taking flight. She is not trying to capture high art. She is simply trying to view the broken world without the suffocating filter of her own guilt. Every click of the shutter feels like a stolen breath. We often overlook a simple lesson. Real healing rarely begins with fixing the chaos around you. It usually starts with remembering how to breathe again. An hour vanishes before Nathaniel returns, gently warning her that the light is dying. I know, she whispers to the sinking sun. The pale glow of the screen illuminates Victoria's exhausted face, carving out the hollows of her cheeks. 216, she murmurs into the midnight silence. Most frames are blurry ghosts, but a rare few hold a bleeding truth. Nathaniel sits on the cold, wooden steps, maintaining a careful distance. His contacts are ready, and the explosive files will go live at 6 in the morning. Marcus will try to bury it, she whispers, her voice shaking. Staring into the dark trees, Nathaniel warns her of the massive fallout ahead. Her family will be dragged through the mud because of her father and his corrupt deals with the syndicate boss. He tells her to brace her heart for a bitter war. When the absolute truth is finally unleashed, the tragic lesson is that the resulting blast radius spares no one, not even the innocent. Nathaniel admits Marcus might accuse her of stealing the documents out of spite. Victoria sighs, feeling the crushing weight of the crime boss pressing on her chest. He assures her his lawyers will handle the fallout. But Victoria locks eyes with him, demanding to know why he is truly risking his life in these safe houses. She knows his story about simple revenge is a hollow lie. Nathaniel freezes completely. When he finally speaks, his voice carries a ragged agony. His father died at his desk, destroying lives until his last breath. Yet at his lavish funeral, society praised his grand legacy. Not one person mentioned the families he shattered. The hardest lesson we learn is that history is written by villains with massive bank accounts, completely erasing the innocent victims they crushed to build their empires. Victoria lets out a trembling breath, watching raw pain break the man wide open. Nathaniel stares down at his hands as if they are dripping with unseen blood, finally revealing a suffocating truth. Amanda was never his first failure. Years ago, his ruthless father cornered a desperate tech genius named Richard Chen. Chen needed funding, and the cruel patriarch demanded absolute control in return. Within 6 short months, the old man gutted the company, sold off every patent, and left Chen with nothing but a ruined marriage and empty pockets. A year later, an entirely broken Chen took his own life, leaving 2 young children behind in the wreckage. It is a grim reminder of a simple truth. Sometimes, the very people offering you a lifeline are actually the ones holding a sharp knife to your throat. Victoria reaches out, softly insisting the tragedy was not his fault, but Nathaniel sharply refuses the grace. He had seen the brutal contracts with his own eyes and knew exactly what his father was plotting. He could have warned Chen to run, but he was young and terrified of crossing his corrupt bloodline. A good man died simply because Nathaniel chose to keep his mouth shut. The suffocating weight of his past cowardice hangs heavy in the room, thick as smoke. Looking at his defeated posture, Victoria finally understands that this entire shadow crusade is his desperate penance. He is fighting for people like her because he failed people like Chen. We often find a powerful truth in these moments. The only way to survive our most haunting regrets is by stepping up to fight someone else's desperate battles. The safe house falls quiet. Nathaniel prepares a simple meal of jarred pasta and frozen bread. Yet, in the midst of absolute chaos, this grounded routine is exactly what Victoria needs to anchor her racing mind. He breaks the silence, asking what truly draws her to the art of photography. Victoria stares at her plate before whispering a single word: control. In the real world, devastating events strike without warning, leaving you dodging the wreckage of a crime family. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? A camera allows her to choose the exact angle. She decides what remains in the frame and what gets cut away entirely. It serves as a profound lesson. Claiming even one tiny sliver of control can keep your spirit from shattering when the rest of your world is burning to ash. Nathaniel presses further, leaning across the table. Was that the real reason Marcus despised her for photography? Victoria offers a bitter smile that never reaches her eyes. Marcus was a man who demanded absolute dominion, unable to stand her having a personal vision. He constantly manipulated her, framing her art as a useless distraction to keep her trapped in his dark syndicate world. The tragedy was that she actually believed his poison. Fighting the crushing gravity of a mafia boss is exhausting, and she mistakenly thought yielding would buy her peace. The harsh reality of life teaches us a painful lesson. Negotiating with a monster is never a true compromise. It is merely a slow, agonizing surrender of your soul. She only woke up when Nathaniel finally saw right through her heavy lies. Victoria confesses Nathaniel was the first person who never manipulated her reality. He simply said she was allowed to walk away. In that moment, something deep inside her broke. Or perhaps it finally pieced itself back together. We forget that sometimes a person must completely shatter before they can truly heal. Later that night, the glare of her phone lights up the dark room. Her sister, Claire, is sobbing. Their father threatened to destroy Claire's life if she refused to help the syndicate hunt Victoria down. You would expect Victoria to feel burning rage. Instead, she feels only a hollow, aching sorrow. Claire is bending to toxic pressure just to stay safe. The profound lesson is that you can rarely judge someone for the desperate choices they make while trying to survive a nightmare. Victoria stares at the glowing bank statements, tracing years of hidden mafia sins. This vendetta is a brutal indictment of every boss who turned a blind eye while her spirit was broken. She asks if exposing these secrets will guarantee her safety. Closing his laptop with heavy finality, Nathaniel tells her the cold truth. Nothing provides perfect safety, but stripping a monster's power removes their claws forever. Victoria's jaw tightens. She does not merely want Marcus broke. She wants him choking on the exact paralyzing terror he forced down her throat for years. You and I have probably both felt that dark, consuming hunger for absolute justice. The clock ticks toward 3:45 in the morning. The world is about to watch a corrupt empire finally burn to the ground. Let us unpack this together. You might expect Victoria to feel absolute triumph as the files upload, but she confesses that only a hollow void remains. Nathaniel collects the damning evidence with steady hands. He pauses in the dim light, offering a profound truth. Vengeance never repairs a fractured soul. The true struggle is discovering who you are once trauma no longer writes your story. Nathaniel understands this devastation perfectly. After his father died, he wandered through years of silent grief, desperate to outrun his family name, before finding purpose in exposing corrupt men. To break the heavy tension, he dryly admits he is a disaster in the kitchen. True healing leaves us with a beautiful lesson. It is never about destroying the monsters who hurt you, but about patiently rebuilding the self they tried to break. A fragile laugh slips past Victoria's lips, piercing the suffocating tension of the room. She watches Nathaniel butcher a simple meal, a flaw she finds strangely comforting. Let us pause here for a moment, you and I. We often think monsters are defeated by armies, but sometimes empires fall while two exhausted people sit in the dark. Victoria grips her camera, mechanically deleting blurred memories, desperate to find a single frame untainted by her past. At 5:30, Nathaniel's phone vibrates violently against the glass. The reckoning has begun. News anchors are already breaking the story. By sunrise, the man who shattered her reality is waking up to prison accounts and active warrants. The illusion of untouchable power always shatters when the truth finally comes to collect. Victoria spins away from the cold window, her pulse hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She demands to know how long until they secure him. Nathaniel, his posture carved from ice, murmurs they have 24 hours. She knows the mind of a cornered predator too well. A man like Marcus does not simply lose, he destroys the board. She whispers that he will come for her blood. Nathaniel not offer hollow comforts. Instead, he moves to a steel cabinet, pulling out a loaded weapon with a terrifying, practiced grace. The digital war has just become physical. He vows Marcus will not walk away breathing. Trembling, she reminds him he claimed he was no savior. The darkest truth of life is that the people who refuse to call themselves heroes are often the only ones willing to stand in the shadows and bleed for you. Nathaniel holds her gaze, the low light catching the hard planes of his face. He tells her plainly that this is no rescue mission. He is merely buying her enough time to save herself. The metallic click of the weapon echoing in the room is chilling. Yet to Victoria, that cold steel feels like the first solid ground she has known in years. Real support never fights your battles for you. It simply provides the cover so you can stand up. The next few hours stretch into agonizing slow motion. Nathaniel tracks the collapse of a billionaire on his monitors, watching fraud charges rip Marcus's pristine reputation to shreds. Victoria tries to hide behind her camera lens, seeking control, but her hands refuse to stop shaking. Every shadow crossing the wall, every car engine idling down the block, feels like the heavy breath of a predator closing in. Every creak of the old floorboards sends a spike of adrenaline through her chest. At 3 p.m, the tension finally snaps. Nathaniel takes a clipped phone call. The hunt is over. Marcus and his lawyers have brokered a formal surrender, putting the monster behind bars before sunset. The iron grip around Victoria's lungs releases. Nathaniel locks eyes with her, speaking the words she never thought she would hear. She is officially safe. But the word tastes metallic. When your safety has been violated for so long, the absence of danger feels like a trap waiting to spring. She asks him, her voice barely a whisper, what she is supposed to do now. His answer is a brutal, beautiful truth. Surviving the storm is only the beginning. The real terrifying work of a lifetime is picking up the broken pieces to build a home of your own. Victoria is done existing in the margins of darkened safe houses. The urge to plant her feet on solid ground becomes an absolute necessity. The true test of a person's resilience always happens in the deafening silence after the sirens fade. She asks Nathaniel to help secure a gallery showing, and he nods, a silent pact. That night, her battered nervous system shuts down, dragging her into a dreamless sleep. Dawn brings a cold, sharp grief. Her phone is entirely blank from her parents. They weighed her survival against a billionaire's wealth, and she lost. Yet a final, venomous text from Marcus waits in her inbox, mocking her for burning his life down. It is a desperate play for guilt. But cutting the anchor to toxic bloodlines is the only genuine way to keep from drowning. Without a flicker of hesitation, Victoria deletes the message. The digital ghost of Marcus is gone. Walking downstairs, the harsh smell of burning bread hits her. Nathaniel stands by the stove, a lethal man utterly defeated by a toaster. A sudden, bright laugh tears from her throat. A ruined breakfast is a beautiful price to pay for a morning free of terror. But the air shifts as Nathaniel gets to business. The gallery wants a full portfolio in 3 days. The panic of the deadline acts as medicine, forcing her mind out of trauma and into art. Raw, bleeding honesty always beats a polished lie. But the true victory is financial. Her father froze her accounts, forgetting her grandmother's hidden trust. The universe often hands you a hidden doorway out of hell. You simply need the absolute nerve to turn the handle and never look back. She had buried the memory of that money, locked away for years. But Nathaniel, precise as a surgeon, found the fracture in the legal armor. By proving financial abandonment, She can shatter the trust's seal. It is an enough capital to buy an apartment, new camera gear, total autonomy. Reclaiming the resources the wolf tried to hoard is the purest form of dominance. When he tells her the ink will dry in 14 days, the suffocating fist in her throat finally lets go. In 2 weeks, no one will ever own her again. The next 3 days blur into a fevered obsession. She sits on the floor, ruthlessly stripping hundreds of raw images down to 20 visceral, haunting photographs. People often misunderstand what true wealth actually is. It is not about millions in a corporate bank. It is the absolute sovereign power to dictate your own life. Victoria types out one last warning before blocking her family permanently. This isn't fueled by anger anymore. It is the strict mathematics of survival. Sometimes, setting a bridge on fire is the only way to ensure the monsters cannot follow you. Sleep refuses to come that night. The darkness plays cruel tricks, twisting ordinary shadows into Marcus's shape. At 3 a.m, she finds Nathaniel bathed in the blue light of a monitor, burying the last remnants of the syndicate. Days later, they meet Sarah Chen, a gallery curator whose family was ironically ruined by Nathaniel's father. Sarah traces the edge of Victoria's prints. She reads the trauma and the violent survival screaming from the paper. Without a single word of pity, she looks up and offers Victoria a solo exhibition in exactly 6 weeks. Picture the heavy weight of this exact moment. The curator offers zero money up front, only a stage to bleed on, but to Victoria it is everything. Stepping into the cold street, a fragile spark catches in her chest. It is not a roaring fire yet, but the void is giving way to hope. Nathaniel watches her spine straighten. She whispers that she thought Marcus had killed the artist inside her, forever. Nathaniel's voice is low, cutting through the doubt. Her talent was never dead. It was just buried alive under a tyrant's boot. His phone vibrates. Marcus is facing the judge on Monday. The empire is crumbling, but the ultimate victory buzzes in her own pocket. The hidden trust funds have officially cleared. When you have survived a psychological cage, even the smallest flame of hope feels like the blinding warmth of the sun. The sheer gravity of the bank notification sinks into her skin. The capital is hers. In years, for the first time in years, the earth beneath Victoria's feet stops shifting, hardening into solid, unyielding stone. This is what true, tactile freedom feels like. She turns to Nathaniel, her eyes fiercely clear, and draws a hard line. She must find her own sanctuary now, without a shadow standing guard. Nathaniel swallows his instincts to protect, offering a slow, respectful nod. As they drive through a violent downpour, the heavy rhythm of the rain washes the last traces of paranoia from her mind. Marcus is drowning in court. Her parents chose their greed, but with her camera, her show, and her money, she is untouchable. Weeks later, her pen scratches across the lease of a new apartment. Building a sovereign life from the ashes of betrayal is the absolute highest form of revenge. Let's unpack this piece by piece, shall we? Healing is never a clean montage with a soaring soundtrack. For Victoria, it looks like a cramped, dusty apartment catching a harsh slice of morning sun. She moves in with a mattress, a cheap table, and her lenses, her whole life packed into Nathaniel's car. He carries the final crate upstairs, his dark eyes searching hers, asking if she is truly ready for this isolation. She tells him she has to prove she can stand alone. He murmurs that she owes the world nothing, but she knows this is a debt she owes her own soul. He leaves his private number on the counter, and the heavy door clicks shut. Immediately, the crushing, dead silence of the room hits her ribs like a hammer. The hardest lesson we ever learn is that the quietest, emptiest rooms always become the arenas for our most violent, deafening internal wars. The camera pans across the stark white gallery. Victoria stands alone in the cold glow. Total freedom carries a very specific terror. Gone are the threats, leaving only the deafening echo of her own thoughts. She stares at 20 framed photographs, bleeding pieces of her soul. Sarah adjusts a frame with soft reassurance, but Victoria prays the crowd will recognize her survival. Soon, strangers sip wine, dissecting her traumas while she shrinks into the shadows, pulse hammering. Then the scene shifts. An older woman freezes before a piece titled Break, immobilized by the raw image. It is a quiet, profound lesson. Genuine art serves as a brutal emotional mirror. Fearlessly whispering the agonizing truths we are simply too terrified to speak aloud. The camera lingers on the photograph, roots clawing toward a sliver of light. The woman trembles, whispering that it feels like gasping for oxygen you cannot reach. Victoria offers a knowing nod. The stranger's armor falls, revealing a survivor of a toxic marriage. She asks if these frames are about leaving, and Victoria softly breathes a yes. The evening dissolves into a blur of patrons buying her documented pain. Suddenly, slicing through the warm light, Nathaniel steps into the room. He looks out of place, yet he showed up. She forces a joke about his bias, but his expression is unyielding. He is just being honest. Here is the vital lesson. Having someone in your corner who offers grounded reality is the ultimate anchor when your entire world spins out of control. Nathaniel scans the room, noting the spaces where her family should be. Victoria's posture is rigid. She admits she barred the doors to them, even her sister. We must acknowledge a brutal truth. Betrayal leaves the deepest wounds when the knife is held by blood. She cut that vein weeks ago, knowing survival requires burning bridges leading to the dark. He gently asks how she is holding up, and her armor fractures. She confesses that some mornings, the phantom weight of her shattered family makes it hard to breathe. She whispers she is managing, but Nathaniel locks onto her, declaring she is thriving. She has sold prints. The money isn't a fortune, but it is untainted. The lesson is undeniable. Building an independent life away from a toxic past is the purest form of victory. Her studio becomes a sanctuary. She channels her trauma into the camera, capturing honest portraits. Watch closely. A mother weeps over an unpolished image of her daughter. That moment lands with crushing gravity. For a woman whose reality was warped by an abuser, hearing someone say she sees clearly is monumental validation. Soon, November drags Marcus's criminal trial into the daylight. The architect of her misery faces justice. Victoria is subpoenaed, standing alongside survivors to expose his violence. The prosecutor prepares her for the vicious tactics ahead, warning they will weaponize her cancelled wedding to paint her as a bitter ex. His advice is simple: breathe. The takeaway is profound. Your factual truth is your absolute best armor when desperate people try to ruin you. Her lawyers warned her not to take the bait. December brings her defining moment on the witness stand. She wears simple clothes, devoid of makeup, wanting the jury to see pure reality. Pushing through the doors feels like stepping into a predator's cage. Stick with me here because the dynamic is about to flip. Marcus sits at the defense table in a sharp suit, yet he appears diminished, pathetic. Their eyes meet, and beneath his practiced veneer, she spots the boiling rage. She takes the oath and calmly lays out the facts. The creeping control, the violence, the terror. On cue, a slick attorney swaggers forward, weaponizing fake sympathy to twist the narrative toward the cancelled wedding. The lesson is timeless. Toxic individuals will flawlessly play the victim when held accountable. The courtroom tension is thick. Victoria's jaw sets as she fires back. She wasn't considering his pride, she declares. She was in a fight for her survival. The lawyer pivots to the ruined article, accusing her of a bitter vendetta. Victoria looks at Marcus, then locks eyes with the attorney. Her demeanor turns to ice. She states, with a haunting calm, that she didn't paint a false narrative. She simply told the truth. The defense exhausts every tactic to break her, but she remains an immovable wall. After 3 grueling weeks, the jury returns. Guilty of assault, guilty of fraud. The judge hands down an 8-year sentence. If we take anything from this, let it be this truth. Genuine freedom is never passively handed to you. It is fiercely forged in the fires of your survival. Watching Marcus led away in handcuffs didn't spark a victory parade. Instead, Victoria felt a hollow silence filling the space where terror had lived for years. Outside, reporters circled like vultures, but she pushed past the camera flashes. Nathaniel was waiting quietly by his car, offering a steady drive home. The moment she locked her apartment door, the emotional dam finally broke. She wept for the naive girl she once was, the family that failed her, and a romance that became a psychological prison. You and I have probably learned this the hard way. Sometimes you have to shatter before you can assemble the pieces into something stronger. By sunrise, the air felt noticeably lighter. She immersed herself back into her art, capturing raw human moments and remembering how to breathe. Victoria's rebuilding phase was a slow grind, but the proof manifested in her art. Her portraits caught the attention of local magazines, securing a solo exhibition as her audience grew. Then, in the stillness of February, her sister Claire reached out from the void. It took Victoria 3 days of mental negotiation before agreeing to a neutral coffee shop meetup. Sitting across the table, Claire looked fragile. The fallout had drained her. She launched into apologies, confessing she lacked the spine to defy their father. Claire revealed she was handed a brutal ultimatum: abandon Victoria or be cut off from the family empire. This brings us to a deeply painful, sobering life lesson. Sharing a bloodline does not magically guarantee loyalty or protection when the real pressure hits. When Claire asked if she was happy, Victoria paused. She wasn't fully healed, but she was cultivating an existence that was unequivocally hers. Then came the revelation. Claire admitted their father's empire had collapsed into bankruptcy. The toxic dynasty had crumbled to dust. Desperate, Claire pleaded to hit the reset button on their sisterhood. Yet, it is a tragic experience to look at someone you love and realize they lack the courage to protect you. Victoria mourned that bond, but refused to anchor herself to someone who shatters under stress. She softly advised Claire to find her own independence first. Walking away, Victoria felt a quiet sorrow, but zero guilt. The lesson is vital. Choosing the harsh reality of your own survival over a comforting lie is never the wrong decision. Spring arrived, erasing the chill of winter. By March, Victoria unveiled her second exhibition, a collection of portraits that captivated the art scene. Prints sold out rapidly, and brands clamored for her vision. At 27, she was constructing her independent life, brick by meticulous brick. But as April settled in, Nathaniel called with news that turned her veins to ice. Marcus was granted early parole for supposed good behavior. The architect of her nightmares was walking the streets again. Nathaniel tried to reassure her with the promise of a strict restraining order. However, the grim life lesson remains. Legal boundaries printed on paper mean nothing to a manipulative predator who believes he owns you. Just like that, the shadows began creeping beneath her door once more. Nathaniel vowed one misstep would send Marcus back to a cell. Yet a profound paralysis gripped Victoria. The phantom of her past was out there, sharing the same oxygen. Every evening became an exhausting ritual of twisting deadbolts and flinching at shadows. Weeks crept by in deceptive silence, lulling her survival instincts. Then came an ordinary Tuesday, shattered by a heavy knock. She peered through the glass, finding the architect of her suffering staring back, demanding a fraction of her time. True courage, you and I must realize, is rarely the absence of terror. It is planting your feet when every nerve screams to flee. Refusing to yield, she squared her shoulders and reminded him of the law. His voice slipped through Deadwood with a chilling calm, asking for 5 minutes as if bargaining for spare change. Out of conditioned reflex, Victoria felt her fingers drift toward the deadbolt. It was the ingrained survival tactic of a victim. The belief that feeding the storm, a small compromise, might delay the hurricane, but offering a concession to a manipulator merely teaches them the exact price of your boundaries. Recognizing the trap, she snapped her hand back. She owed the ghost of her past absolutely nothing. Snatching her phone, she dialed 911 without hesitation. The instant Marcus heard the authorities on the line, the polite facade dissolved. The mask fell away, revealing the raw, venomous reality of a man realizing his absolute loss of power. Through the thick oak door, Marcus unleashed an absolute flood of venom, expertly casting himself as the bleeding victim. It was a flawless display of psychological manipulation. But watch Victoria in the dim hallway light. She stood perfectly still, entirely unmoved. Her voice cut through the wood with devastating clarity. He had built his own cage, and she refused to burn inside it. A furious fist collided with the door before his heavy boots echoed away into the dark. Later, when Nathaniel stepped inside, and the deadbolt snapped shut, the adrenaline finally abandoned her. As her frame violently shook, he remained a quiet shadow, murmuring steady assurances of her iron will. The greatest triumph over a brutal history is simply denying the monster the satisfaction of watching you break. The emotional dam finally shattered. In the dim light, she confessed a terrifying truth to Nathaniel. There, her trembling hand had almost turned the lock, almost surrendering to the ancient urge to placate the monster. He silenced her guilt instantly, anchoring her to the fact that she chose her own survival. The lingering terror was suffocating. Nathaniel refused to leave her unguarded, claiming the faded sofa as a silent watchman. A brief flicker of defiance crossed Victoria's face. Yet, there is profound strength in allowing someone else to carry the shield when your own arms are failing. They spent the evening building a fragile illusion of normalcy. But the peace was doomed. At exactly 3 a.m, the heavy silence was violently pierced by a metallic, blood-chilling scrape. This was not the timid tap of a late-night visitor. It was the agonizing rattle of a predator testing the cage. Victoria crept forward, finding Nathaniel awake in the shadows, whispering to dispatch. The rattling escalated into a violent scrape against the steel deadbolt. A crowbar. The architect of her trauma was tearing at her sanctuary. Soon, the wail of sirens pierced the night. The scraping dissolved into the panicked thunder of boots fleeing the corridor. Marcus vanished before the flashing lights arrived, but his blind rage proved fatal. He dropped the iron, offering a pristine portrait of his guilt to the security lenses above. True survival often means simply holding your ground, allowing the darkness to finally drag itself into the unforgiving light. Within 48 hours, the architecture of his escape collapsed. Picture the terminal. Marcus apprehended, clutching forged papers in a desperate bid to vanish. The machinery of justice crushed him, but was instantly denied. On the courthouse steps, Nathaniel delivered the verdict: 5 years minimum. The threat was neutralized. But you and I understand the bone-deep exhaustion that follows a prolonged war. There was no cinematic celebration, only the heavy sigh of a woman utterly depleted. Nathaniel gently urged her to pour that lingering energy back into her canvas. He had acted as a silent sentinel for a year without demanding a single reward. This highlights a profound truth. The only method to truly banish a lingering shadow is to cultivate a brilliant inner light. Trust was a rare currency in her rebuilt world, yet Victoria had given it to him. Stripping away polite defenses, she demanded his true motives, needing answers unclouded by guilt. Nathaniel offered a raw confession. She had initially mirrored a ghost from his past, someone he failed to shield, yet his objective had shifted. She was no longer a vehicle for his redemption. He simply admired the spirit that refused to shatter. Victoria whispered her growing affection, yet confessed she was still mapping the steep terrain of her independence. In a beautiful display of restraint, Nathaniel gracefully retreated. He demanded nothing. Genuine love is never a frantic race to claim a prize. It is the quiet patience of standing guard while someone carefully reconstructs their shattered armor. In a quiet moment, Victoria asked if he intended to remain by her side. Nathaniel promised his steady presence for exactly as long as she required it. As the seasons melted into summer, Victoria constructed her new reality. She transformed an empty room into a thriving studio, building her empire brick by painted brick. Nathaniel remained a calm orbit, offering shared meals and a loyalty devoid of expectations. When October arrived, bringing the bitter anniversary of the ceremony meant to seal her doom, she found herself utterly unmoved. She stood amidst her creation, a monolith of resilience. Let us examine this carefully. Healing is rarely a cinematic sprint. It is the methodical accumulation of ordinary, peaceful days, gradually forging you into the sovereign author of your own narrative. Out of the smoldering wreckage of her past, an empire had risen. Nathaniel waited with warm food and wine to honor the anniversary of her liberation. They settled into an easy rhythm, deliberately banishing the ghost of her abuser. The conversation drifted until Nathaniel asked about her vision for the next 5 years. 12 months prior, the mere concept of the future would have triggered panic. Now, she met his gaze with absolute clarity. She spoke of her art gracing editorial pages and a life permanently stripped of hypervigilance. She craved the peace of being utterly untouchable. There is a profound truth hidden here. Surviving the initial trauma is merely the opening act. The true masterpiece of recovery is unlearning the ingrained instinct to flinch when you feel a drop of rain. Let us unpack the psychological weight of this together. Victoria confessed her terror of dissolving into someone else's shadow, of placing her faith in the wrong hands. Pouring the wine, Nathaniel offered a gentle correction. While fear might still be a passenger, it no longer drove the car. She had spent the year terrified, yet still constructed a kingdom. Victoria then turned the lens on him, asking for his 5-year horizon. Lowering his stoic defenses, Nathaniel admitted his only ambition was to remain in her orbit. As a partner or a steadfast friend, he refused to lose her. Victoria was left utterly speechless. The cornerstone of her survival had quietly evolved into her anchor. Courage is never the absence of dread. It is the conscious decision to walk straight into the flames despite the trembling in your hands. Observe the respect woven into this dynamic. Nathaniel was the architect of her rescue, yet never treated her like a conquered prize. Victoria had kept him at arm's length, believing she needed impenetrable armor before accepting a partner. Tonight, she cautiously lowered the drawbridge, suggesting he could remain a fixture, perhaps evolving into something deeper. His response lacked theatrical urgency. He simply stated that, having waited 12 months, time was irrelevant. Throughout the season, they shared the gentle rhythm of genuine courtship, though she fiercely maintained the sanctity of her separate home. This reveals a crucial psychological principle. Establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of emotional exile. It is simply constructing a sturdy door, granting you the power to choose who receives the key. Victoria unlearned the toxic myth that companionship required surrendering autonomy. As winter set in, the legal hammer dropped. Marcus received an 8-year sentence in a concrete cell, devoid of parole. The phantom of her past was permanently caged. Watch Victoria observe the proceedings with the detached boredom of a tedious lecture, denying him even a fraction of her gaze. By spring, her studio was a thriving sanctuary. She honored her triumph with a solitary escape to the ocean. Listening to the crashing waves, a profound realization washed over her. 72 hours had passed without a single intrusive memory of her abuser. This leaves us with an essential truth. The ultimate cure for deep trauma is rarely found in explosive joy. Sometimes, the most magnificent victory you can achieve is simply the luxury of a quiet, undisturbed mind. You and I need to appreciate the scale of this transformation. The obsessive checking of deadbolts is gone. Flinching at sudden shadows is a ghost of the past. That terrified hostage has been permanently overwritten. When her train pulls into the station, the camera finds Nathaniel standing there, solid and calm. He studies her face and sees that the invisible weight she used to drag around has vanished. She walks straight up to him and kisses him without an ounce of hesitation. Notice the deliberate pacing of this final act. They wait 6 full months before sharing a roof, and even then she fiercely protects the sanctuary of her studio. The psychological lesson woven into this ending is simple. The smartest move you can ever make is pouring your own concrete foundation before you let anyone else build their life on top of yours. You and I know there is a strange side effect to surviving agony. It installs a radar deep in your chest, tuned to the hidden pain of others. As Victoria watched her business catch fire, she began mentoring young artists who carried that same beaten-down posture she once had. She hands them a lifeline. Choosing your own survival over another person's comfort is never selfish. Picture 3 years after that disastrous wedding. Victoria stands in a warmly lit gallery. Her empire hangs on the walls around her. She titled the collection after the fall, a nod to hitting rock bottom before clawing her way to the surface. Nathaniel slides through the crowd with champagne. He studies the resilient woman she has become, gently clinks her glass, and softly says to falling, "And landing," she fires right back. The gallery hums with the warmth of her chosen family. The camera pans to Claire, proving they repaired their fractured friendship. But her parents are nowhere in this golden light. They threw her to the wolves when she needed protection most. The brutal reality we must accept is that some relationships will not survive contact with the truth. Yet Victoria barely notices their empty space. She buried that old grief long ago. Suddenly, the gallery owner steps into the frame alongside James Park, an influential museum curator. He studies her canvases, calls the collection a masterpiece, and casually offers her a massive solo exhibition right on the spot. All the air empties from her lungs, her hands trembling slightly by her side. The Contemporary Museum, this was the ambition Marcus tried to destroy. He used to laugh in her face, labeling her creative work as worthless. Now she stands here holding a top curator's card, her fingers trembling against the heavy paper stock. She looks over at Nathaniel, her eyes wide and stunned. Did she just win the game? He kisses her forehead. A quiet reminder that he saw this power in her from the beginning, but you and I must be honest here. Healing is never a clean upward line. There were dark nights where the old panic left her gasping on the cold bathroom tile. The deepest life lesson to take from this is that true survival is rarely about feeling invincible. It is simply the quiet refusal to stop writing your own story, even when the odds demand you surrender. After the gallery noise fades, she and Nathaniel walk the dark streets like they own the concrete. The streetlights catch the peaceful curve of her smile. He turns and asks if she is happy. For anyone who survived such betrayal, happiness will always carry battle scars. Yet, out of that emotional ash, a new reality has bloomed. She looks him in the eye and says yes. She tries to thank him for pulling her from the wreckage, but he shuts that down. He reminds her she saved herself. He just guarded the perimeter while she rebuilt her mind. Here is the truth of it. You never need a white knight to rescue you. You only need someone willing to hold the line while you locate your own strength. He swings their door open, and she steps into the peace she fought for. Look at the cinematic architecture of this arc. 3 years ago, she was a broken hostage trapped in a church, convinced her story was over. But that was never an ending. It was merely the brutal origin story of an independent force. That terrified bride would not recognize the unapologetic powerhouse standing here today. She paid the toll for this peace in pure emotional sweat. There is a harsh but necessary truth here. Cutting off toxic people who refuse to respect your boundaries is never an act of cruelty. It is a necessary survival tactic. Falling apart does not mean you failed. It just means the old foundation had to be demolished so you could construct a fortress. She realized no rescue party was coming, and that was fine. She was fully capable of saving herself. The precise second she shattered her psychological cage, the trajectory of her life shifted. The ghosts of Marcus and her flawed family might always echo in her mind. You cannot just erase the villains who tried to break you, but they no longer get to sit in the director's chair. I think that is the most vital life lesson you and I can take away. We all carry heavy baggage. We have all survived chapters defined by deep betrayal, but your trauma is just a prologue. It is never your final destination. Victoria took all that calculated manipulation, reversed the polarity, and weaponized it to build an untouchable empire. She grabbed the pen right out of their hands, stared out at an unwritten horizon, and started scripting her own beautiful, fiercely independent life.